All right.
Doomer, am I talking over you? How are we doing on audio? Hey everyone, welcome to the space. While we're just doing some housekeeping and we're trying to get our esteemed guests up to the speaker panel, please retweet the space, tell all your friends. Tiff, how's the audio?
I hear you. I have yet to hear Doomer, and we're still waiting on Mr. Salla to get up here, but I am looking forward to this.
If you guys could hear me from the phone.
We got you.
All right. I heard you, Fringe, but when I was on the phone, like nothing went through and the mic used to work. So, Michael, do me a favor. I know you're in the room. If you can hit the big mic button, it should be in the pop-up window. Michael's joining us from desktop. And if you have trouble finding the mic button, just let us know in the group chat we have set up for you. For everybody else in the room, please hang tight. Please don't put any requests in. I only want Michael Salla's request in right now. But I expect that we're going to have time for Q&A today.
Hi, can you hear me yet?
We can. Wonderful. Were you able to hear me, Michael, at all?
I can, yes. I can
Wonderful.
hear everyone.
For the people who absolutely cannot stand me, if I'm coming across with like a double echo, please blow up my DMs and tell me I'm a horrible person. Michael, it is an honor to have you. You're here with my other two hosts, Fringe and Tiff. Fringe and Tiff, do you want to just briefly introduce yourselves, and then I'm going to let and then, well, first of all, this is the Doom Room, Michael. You have a lot of courage coming in here. We're filled with love and lighters. But we typically cover dark alien agendas and catastrophism. But we also have, extremely inspirational guests. We had Eric Mitchell, Michael P. Masters, Anjali from Gaia. It's an honor to have you. And then I'm going to let Fringe and Tiff introduce themselves, and then I'd love to hear from you if you don't mind.
Sure, that sounds good.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here. I know the community is super excited. There was actually a pre-game space because the community is so excited to hear from you, especially just coming off your convention. And I just want you to know how much everyone very much appreciates hearing from you today. And thank you so much for being here, Tiff.
Yeah, same. I have heard a lot of your stuff. I know a lot of people are big fans. It is fascinating, the content that you put out, and you're so knowledgeable. So having you in this space is very meaningful. I believe that everybody on the panel is an experiencer, and then a lot of the audience as well. So your insights are yeah, important to us.
Wonderful. I look forward to sharing.
Michael, feel free to give us a brief introduction. I personally would love to know how you even got into this field and how you developed the field of exopolitics. I know you from political science. You can give us a nice 101 to Michael Salla. I'm sure it would be helpful to a lot of people.
Sure. Yeah, I was a full-time professor at American University in Washington, D.C., and in 2001 I heard the Disclosure Project press conference that Dr. Steven Greer had organized, and I heard the 21 witnesses speak, and I was just blown away. I just didn't know that was possible, that kind of cover-up of extraterrestrial visitation, UFOs, all the data, all the evidence. And I immediately began researching it. The university didn't want to have anything to do with that research, and so eventually the university and I had to part ways. Essentially, they sacked me, and I went independent. I was one of the ones that coined the term exopolitics, and I have been researching it and writing about exopolitics ever since 2003, when I wrote my first study paper called "The Need for Exopolitics."
Michael, thank you for that intro. Can you give us a definition for exopolitics?
I didn't quite hear you. There was you're coming in and out. If you could repeat that.
It's the CIA. Yeah, Michael, they're after me. They're always messing with my tech. Can you hear me at all? Am I still breaking up?
I can hear you now. Fine.
Exopolitics, can you give us a quick and dirty definition?
Sure. The simplest definition is just the political implications of extraterrestrial life. And so what that means is I look at, who are the main actors in the whole question of extraterrestrial visitation, the different groups, the different actors, the different processes, and the different institutions. So it's just looking at like the leading personalities or organizations like the CIA. It's looking at the process of covering up the truth about extraterrestrials visiting us. So, looking at how the secrecy system works, and looking at some of the key individuals like President Kennedy and President Eisenhower, and how did they deal with the UFO issues. So those are that's kind of like how I understand exopolitics.
And Michael, you mentioned that you got sacked from the university. Is it okay if I ask what caused them to fire you?
Sure. Yeah, I had a cover story written about my research on exopolitics that appeared in the Washington Post. So it was a full-length feature story in the Styles section of the Washington Post, and that was in February of 2004. And at the university, essentially, where I worked, I was at that time I was a researcher in residence, and I was told that I would no longer be supported at the university because, in their view, I had associated the university with conspiracy theory, and they rejected any kind of effort to study extraterrestrial life as just speculation and conspiracy theory, regardless of all the evidence, any data I had to give them. They just dismissed it, and so they said this kind of conspiracy theory has no place within a university, and so your position is not going to be renewed. The program that you were setting up is summarily terminated, and that was it. As of August of 2004, I had to leave the university and leave the United States for Australia, which is I'm an Australian expatriate.
Michael, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that. I think it's. May I ask how long ago that was?
That all happened in 2004 when I was dismissed and had to leave the country, and then different things happened and I was able to come back and so forth. But yeah, that's when I stopped being an academic and began my work as an independent researcher.
What is the greatest difference for you in terms of the nature of your work, or how you do work, or how you view research since you've left academia in the dust?
Well, in academia, you're always trying to write papers for different academic journals. And the more papers you write and get accepted into these academic journals, the higher your profile, the more likely you're going to get jobs in different universities and so forth. But in this field of exopolitics, what I learned very, very quickly was that because any attempt to study extraterrestrial life was just immediately dismissed as conspiracy theory, that I could not get any academic journals to consider my work. And I submitted one of my research papers on exopolitics to the Journal of Peace Research, which is a leading international journal on peace studies, and I had previously published with them. I had previously been a referee for them, but when I submitted my paper, they didn't even send it on to referees. So that meant I had no choice but to go independent. Just go completely outside of the academic process and just find my way through independent research of, starting up a website, having publishing books, writing books, publishing them, and setting up independent conferences. So it took a few years to kind of set all that up, but eventually it turned out all right. But it definitely took a good decade to set something up.
I'm fascinated by this topic probably more than most people, and I want to go a little bit further down this rabbit hole. But before I do, Fringe and Tiff, it feels so good to have the Doomer Trinity back again. But I don't want to just make this a series of my questions. I want you two to get a chance to get in there. And same thing goes for you, Michael. I want us to have fun. This is the room to get dark and dangerous, or happy and dangerous. Assume that this is the opposite of the academic environment that ousted you. We like to get really smart here. We like to get really dangerous. But the intellectual caliber is high, and there's really no Overton window. So I have a million different questions. I definitely want to touch on your perspective on the hearings. But feel free to sort of take the reins and direct the conversation to wherever you want to take it as well, Michael. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I know a lot of people are also very curious about how it's going with JP. That's the question I get asked the most, is what's going on with JP. And then alternatively, I feel like you've gone through something just from trying to just explore this topic, as many people who become public with their thoughts and feelings about extraterrestrials pretty recently, though. So with these changes, it must be affecting you, the way it's becoming mainstream, and how much documentation and content and research you've done. You are now a treasure trove of information. And so with this changing environment regarding this topic, how are you feeling, and what's changing for you? And also, of course, JP.
Hey, can anybody hear anything?
No, I didn't want to interrupt
Can,
Michael.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I had my mute button on.
it's totally fine. Michael, there's the typical audio issues at Spaces. Our audience gets it. Go ahead.
Right. Okay. As far as JP is concerned, he recently was given an honourable discharge on August 30. That's related to a number of medical issues he encountered during his service. Part of that was that Army personnel were required to take the COVID shots, and that led to him on August 30 being given an honourable discharge, and also virtually a full military pension, which is very unusual for someone who hasn't served for 20 years. But this apparently is the way in which they deal with army or any kind of military servicemen who have any kind of contact or any medical issues arising from their UFO interactions. And during his various missions, I mean, now I think we've got 38 that have come out so far. He's described that it does take does take a big toll on the body, going into different environments with different electromagnetic fields, different frequencies, and gravitational fields and temporal fields. All of these things take a big stress on the body. And so compounded with the weakening of his body through the COVID shots, whatever kind of medical technologies he was given access to help him, they weren't sufficient. And so at the end of the day, he was given a medical discharge and permanent disability, but still is able to continue doing the missions, because what has happened now is that he no longer has to do the kind of normal range of military activities that he was doing previously, which was fulfilling his military occupation specialty as a quartermaster and chemical equipment repairer, and also doing paratrooper training, which was stressful on the body. That he doesn't have to do any of that now. But even though he's now officially retired, he can still be called upon to do missions, to do covert missions, and he's being told that that's exactly what will be happening. As regard to the what's happening now with the UFO field, with it kind of like going mainstream, it really is. What I would say is that what we are witnessing now is kind of like a hijacking or a taking over of the UFO narrative by people that are associated closely with the military intelligence community, especially the intelligence community. So when you look at people like Luis Elizondo, David Grush, Michael Schellenberg is more a journalist. George Knapp is also a journalist. You have an attempt to define the UFO field in terms of credible reports from credible witnesses that are accepted as scientifically valid, and then you generate a narrative around it saying, oh, well, this is legitimate ufology, or actually more correctly, this is legitimate UAP studies, and everything else outside of that belongs to this field of conspiracy. And so what you're having is, on the one hand, UFOs are becoming more mainstream, but the field is being hijacked by people that want to take it all into this new narrative that UFOs are unknown, they're a national security threat, and that there have been no successful reverse engineering of captured UFO craft that have some kind of non-human intelligence component. And so I think that is what disturbs me and a lot of others that have been in this field for decades now, is that all the previous research that had been done is simply dismissed. All of the hundreds, even thousands of witnesses, many of them very credible people, are simply ignored because now the UFO issue is being has been hijacked by people that want to make it mainstream, but fit within a narrative that they want to tightly control.
Fringe, feel free to jump in anytime. Of course, you as well, Tiff. Let me know, Tiff, did you have any more questions right now, the second?
Not a time. I just wanted to address the JP so people could hear that part, but we'll go with the flow as usual.
Fringe, anything top of mind for you?
No, I'm just super interested to start hearing about Michael's own insight on what you just discussed, Michael, the narrative, the national security threat, and this idea that there's been no successful reverse engineering.
Sure, yeah, I think that's a key question here. I mean, that's like, has there been successful reverse engineering? This is something that people who are associated with this attempt to bring UFO studies into the kind of mainstream, they're all kind of like coalescing around this idea that these UFOs have crashed, some have been retrieved, been taken to various corporate laboratories, but they haven't been successfully reverse engineered. And that runs contrary to many hundreds of other insiders, whistleblowers, witnesses who say that, they've flown on craft that are owned by the government, by the military. I mean, JP is just one among many. He's been on these craft and they're flown by a covert branch of the military. For example, the US Air Force the US Air Force commandos. They operate some of these craft out of MacDill Air Force Base, and JP photographed the craft and he's been taken on the craft. So there's evidence that these craft exist. There are many hundreds of insiders that have talked about being taken in some of these craft that have been reverse engineered. I mean, these are people that are part of the kind of secret space program genre. And they say that in many cases they've been on these 20 and back programs. One of the people that presented at this Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection Conference that I was at this last weekend is Tony Rodriguez, and he said that he was taken to the moon and he was part of he was on one of these craft that are owned by the military. Niara Islay is another one that was taken on a craft that is operated by the US military. So there were just many, many witnesses, but these are dismissed and ignored by those that are embracing this current narrative that UFOs are a mystery. We don't know where they're from. They're associated with non-human intelligence, and the technology is way too advanced to be reverse engineered, which, I mean, just on the face of it, if you accept what, say, someone like David Grush says, that the first UFO craft was recovered in 1933 in Italy, I mean, they're saying that in the last 91 years, that even though different governments have had possession of these recovered UFOs, that they haven't been able to reverse engineer them. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Michael, what's your best understanding or best guess regarding the landscape of reverse engineering in terms of time and in terms of who successfully reverse engineered or who owns this tech? When do you think reverse engineering first successfully happened, and in whose hands do you think it's currently in?
Okay, well, that's that opens up a can of worms, because the first successful reverse engineering of these technologies happened in Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. I mean, that they successfully developed the first programs, and there's documentation for that. And what we know is that the Germans were able to develop sufficiently advanced flying saucer craft with the help of some extraterrestrial visitors, that they were able to relocate some of their most advanced technologies in South America and Antarctica. And that happened towards the end of the Second World War, so that by the end of the Second World War, while Nazi Germany had been defeated, this advanced technology program involving flying saucers had been relocated down to Antarctica, and that after the war, this kind of enclave of Germans who had developed these very advanced technologies were able to build out their technologies. They were able to make them much more sophisticated. They were able to successfully weaponize them, something they didn't do during the Second World War, but they were able to do it immediately after the war, so that by the time you had the Operation High Jump expedition in 1946-1947, the Germans had successfully weaponized their saucer craft, so that what the best Navy fighters, jet fighters at the time, were defeated down there in Antarctica. And so ever since that time, the Germans were in a position where they could continue to build out their program, but also secretly establish agreements with the Americans. And that's one of the things about what happened after the Second World War, was that the Germans in Antarctica realized that they could not militarily defeat the United States in a head-on confrontation, but they could subvert and infiltrate the United States and take over key institutions so that they could maintain their own breakaway civilization in Antarctica and South America. And that's what happened through programs like Operation Paperclip, where a lot of former German scientists were brought into the United States and given senior positions in various government, military, and corporate projects. I mean, one of the kind of startling thing is that the Apollo program was literally run by former Nazi Germans. I mean, Dr. Kurt Debus, who headed the Apollo program out of the Kennedy Space Center, was a former Nazi SS officer, and also you had Werner von Braun, who was also a former Nazi, and he ran the program out of the Marshall Space Flight Center. So you had these Germans running the Apollo program, and in one of my books, Antarctica's Hidden History, I essentially show how the Apollo program was actually a gigantic money laundering operation, where people thought that the Apollo program was all about getting Americans to the moon, but it was really all about getting Germans to Mars and beyond.
So many, I have like 50 different television sets going off in my mind, and each different channel is a different thing I want to ask you. Let's start with the last thing you just said. And by the way, I do need to make a disclaimer. First of all, I'm having a ton of fun. Michael, Salla, everybody in this room, please retweet it, as much as you can, DM it. We're already a couple minutes in and we're talking Nazis and aliens. And I think that's about as much fun as you can have with your clothes still on.
And
I do need to make, go ahead, friend.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were done with your clothes
No, you're
on.
good.
I figured
No, go ahead.
there, but I should have known better. I am so tracking with Michael right now. I can't disagree with a single thing he said so far, which is actually surprising to me. So I wasn't sure what I was getting into today, and I'm pleasantly surprised on all this information he's bringing forward. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, and I mean, I can always disagree with everyone, unfortunately. But you heard it here first, everybody. We had disclosure. Fringe officially today, October 3rd, is a love and lighter. Tweet it away, let everybody know. But I need to give a disclaimer, Michael, because when you asked me what to call me when we were talking on the phone, and half of me is black, half of me is German. So half of me feels guilty for what my people have done, and half of me is angry for what's been done to my people. Half the time I'm late, half the time I'm on time. So that's why we started late today. The black side won, but I need to let everybody know I'm not part of the secret Nazi regime. I don't have any relatives in Argentina doing anything. I need to ask you about Mars. Why can you explain to me why you have the understanding that the Apollo program was actually about Mars and not the moon?
Well, the Apollo program, as we know, was all about getting to the moon, building these massive rockets, the Saturn V rockets that would take astronauts to the moon. But the Germans had reached the moon towards the end of the Second World War. And this was something that they had been able to do through their successful building of these Hannibal spacecraft. There were a series of Hannibal spacecraft that they had built with different capabilities, each one getting larger, and more capable of kind of interplanetary travel. So the Hannibal 3, the third in the series, that was able to fly to the moon and also, deeper into our solar system like Mars. So they went to the moon at the end of the Second World War. They were given a facility through their extraterrestrial allies. I mean, that's something that for a lot of people is hard to swallow, but the Germans were being helped by a group of extraterrestrials that people describe as the Draco reptilians, who also shared a kind of imperialistic worldview where, supremacy of the dominant species, that they had the right to rule and so forth. So the Dracos kind of like aligned with that. And so the whole German or Nazi Aryan philosophy was something that the Draco also embraced, that kind of view. So they were natural allies. And so they built, the Germans were able to have access to a base on the far side of the moon. And from there, they were able to then use that as a launching pad to do missions to Mars. And they, over the course of the 1950s and 1960s, began developing underground colonies in Mars, again with the help of their allies. This is the Draco reptilians. And those bases eventually were expanded once the United States reached agreement with the Antarctic Germans. And that happened in the 1950s under Allen Dulles, who was the director of the CIA. And he, during the Second World War, he was the guy that conducted negotiations with the Germans for the surrender of Nazi Germany. And interestingly enough, Allen Dulles and his brother, John Foster Dulles, who was the Secretary of State, they visited Adolf Hitler in 1933, that they were part of a contingent of American industrialists who supported Hitler. They thought that Hitler would be good for German industry. And so through that long association, Allen Dulles, he was the guy that forged these agreements between the US military-industrial complex and the Germans. And so that's when the infiltration of the US military-industrial complex began, and the Fourth Reich really took over.
First of all, this is fascinating. I have a 16-year-old son, and I tell him all the time, probably just, for PR sake, for my own image sake, because I've become more public about my UFO personality in the last 2 years. I said that, he and I and his history teachers, if disclosure happens, we're all going to have to sit back down in history class, and at least all of the 20th century is going to have to be retold. Because it seems like there's no way to understand the 20th century correctly if you take extraterrestrials out of it. Do you agree with that vague, general, reductive statement that essentially everything needs to be relearned?
Absolutely, yes. That's why I gave up my career in international politics, which was a pretty decent career. I did enjoy teaching about international conflict and what was happening, but I very quickly realized just how important this information was for understanding what's causing international conflict. And it's because there is this kind of like behind the scenes contest between different extraterrestrial groups who are probably the best way to describe it is that different governments are being and different institutions are being used as proxies in this ongoing galactic war, which has found its way to Earth. So on the one hand, you have the Draco reptilians and their allies working with sympathetic groups like the Nazis. And on the other hand, you have groups like this confederation or like the Galactic Federation of Worlds, which is working with more democratically aligned institutions and organizations. And so you have this conflict, but no one really is very clean. In the United States, for example, I mean, you have some very badly compromised organizations like the CIA, but on the other hand, you have some very ethical or more ethical organizations like the US Navy when it comes to this issue. So it gets very murky, very difficult to understand, but definitely the history will have to be rewritten, and the fundamental point at which history will have to be written is the idea that the Germans suffered total defeat in the Second World War, that in fact the Germans were able to relocate, and through that relocation and their subsequent infiltration, that they were able to establish a Fourth Reich. And that right now what we are witnessing is this attempt to disclose information so humanity can free itself both of the influence of the deep state and its Fourth Reich partner, so that we can actually start working more with these positive extraterrestrial groups associated with organizations like the Galactic Federation of Worlds, the Andromeda Council, and so forth.
It's difficult to be an expert on a story if half the main characters are unknown. Like, we've got all these factions of extraterrestrials possibly influencing everything in history, but then we also have the cataclysmic resets that don't seem to be we don't know publicly. I mean, some of us do, but about our past civilizations and how they went down. And I know that they know. I mean, we have enough evidence to say that it happened. So just all these puzzle pieces missing, it's really difficult to fully comprehend the whole picture.
Well, that's right. That's what I try to do, is to try to kind of present as much information as possible so that people can understand the big picture here, that we have the off-world extraterrestrial groups, that they are competing against one another for influence on Earth. Some are very ethical, highly evolved spiritual beings, and other groups are kind of very predatory in nature and imperialistic. And on the other hand, we have inner Earth civilizations. I mean, you have civilizations under the Earth's surface that go back many hundreds of thousands, millions of years. Not all of them are human looking. Some of them are reptilian or insectoid looking. That doesn't make them bad at all. It just means that they have a different history. They have different kind of priorities and orientations. And so, my goal is to really try to understand, who are all the different actors, who are the different groups that are involved in kind of this big picture that we have to deal with here, so that we can make the right choices. So I try to kind of as best I can, interview people, do research, so that it becomes clearer who's who, what their agenda is. And it's not easy. You just keep doing the research, but over the years, I think I've been able to kind of get closer and closer to a kind of a fairly accurate understanding of the big picture.
And thank you for the work that you're doing. I have a lot of differing perspectives and differing opinions, but I want to put those aside for a while. I think there's a whole murder of people who are waiting for me to dig into the doom, but I want to hold, because I'm learning a lot from you right now, and I really want to open my mind and challenge some of my biases regarding, like you said, this other, what do you want to call it, decision tree branch of history, some high castle, type world that we might actually be living in right now. So I'm just letting my audience know I'm going to I have a lot of Giorgiani's perspectives. I don't know if you've ever gotten into Jason Reza Giorgiani's work. And I think it would be awesome to have a conversation between you two live in a space. But, Fringe, go ahead and jump in. I really want to get the entire Michael Salla perspective.
Yeah, just thanks, Ulrich. Just because we're on the topic, I was going to hold this for later, but we are on the topic. So I'm just going to bring up a few of my own concerns. First of all, I am 100% tracking with everything you're saying. Regarding the Nazis, the breakaway, I've flown their craft. I've been presented with what appears to be, and I always say appears because I can't know for certain, appears to be a human breakaway, tested their equipment for them, all kinds of nonsense. However, I'm also very suspicious of all of these entities because they are deceptive, they're manipulative. I don't think we can ignore that aspect, especially if you look into the abduction research. So I do get suspicious of this, these different factions, the White Hats, the Galactic Federation, and I'm suspicious that we might be dealing with a good cop, bad cop scenario, or that one's our enemy and we're just less of an enemy, maybe a false light scenario. So I'd love to hear what information and perspective do you have that makes you trust this Galactic Federation side? I think the two, it's obvious that one is presenting itself as the better choice, but what makes you sure, or maybe you're not so sure, that it is the better choice and not just a good cop, bad cop, or the lesser of two evils?
Well, yeah, that is a really important question. I mean, are we dealing with a good cop, bad cop scenario where you just have the perception of different extraterrestrial groups, but really behind the scenes they're working with one another? Or are they genuinely antagonistic towards one another and using us as proxies in their battle? Or maybe they're using us as allies. Now, one person that I did cite quite a lot, and it was very helpful in my research, was this former aerospace engineer, William Tompkins. He's written 3 books have been put out so far on his memoirs, Selected by Extraterrestrials, and he says that that the U.S. Navy learned during the Second World War that the Germans were working with this group of reptilian Dracos, and that the Navy was approached and began working with these human-looking beings that Tompkins called Nordics. Now, JP has come across these Nordics again and again, and you have others like Elena Danaan talking about the Galactic Federation of Worlds, that it's not exclusively Nordic, but quite a large number of them are Nordic, human-looking. Now, he described it as this being a genuine conflict between the Draco reptilians and their allies against the Nordics and their allies, which at that point during the Second World War were the Allied powers. Now, this is where the whole good cop, bad cop scenario breaks down, because if you accept that, these groups are really part of a good cop, bad cop scenario, then, that would suggest that World War II was really all about these two groups maneuvering against one another so that the Earth could be co-opted by them collaborating in some way. And that just didn't happen. What I've seen is that conflict between the Nordics or the Galactic Federation and the Dracos and their allies, that happened during the Second World War, and it's been happening ever since. That conflict has not stopped. So I think what we are witnessing is a genuine conflict between two groups or factions of extraterrestrials that genuinely are opposed to one another's goals, and that one wants to uplift and help humanity enter into a Star Trek future, while the other group is trying to do everything it can to subvert and infiltrate humanity because it doesn't see us as really worthy of being given any kind of greater status in the galaxy, that we're too they might dismiss us in the sense that we're too primitive, we are very savage, need to be controlled, and that they see us as a valuable resource.
And Tiff and French, just so you know, much like some of the extraterrestrials deceive us, my iPad is lying to me about hands. So it says there's no hands on the phone, and says there's hands on the iPad. So just jump in, like whenever, and interrupt me as well. Michael, I mean, there's so many, I don't even know where to start. I'm like a kid in a candy store. Somebody needs to stop me. Somebody needs to control me. So let's just get messy. Nordics, of course, there can be exceptions. Like there might be a breakaway Nordic faction, but in general, Nordics, good guys, bad guys, side of the Galactic Federation. And what is your best guess? Like, what do they want? And yeah, that's my first question.
Right. Well, I think that the Nordics, I mean, that describes a particular kind of physiology, the blue eyes, the white hair, fair skin and so forth. But that is not really what the Galactic Federation kind of like comprises. It's, you have those that do fulfill those kinds of racial characteristics, but then others have different racial characteristics. But as far as Nordics, that term is concerned, I mean, you can have those that are genuinely part of this kind of benevolent force to help uplift us, help free us from the kind of oppression of the deep state and of the Fourth Reich. But then you have those that are part of that agenda. I mean, there were Nordics that did help the German breakaway civilization. So they seem to have been a minority, but nevertheless, they did help. And there are also reptilians that are part of the kind of like a more progressive side of things, trying to help uplift our planet, take us away from these dark practices of the deep state and the Fourth Reich. So it really does get blurred in terms of, if you try to understand extraterrestrial groups just in terms of how they look, it gets very confusing because you can get Nordics on both sides. But I think as far as organizations are concerned, I mean, I think it's a little bit clearer. I mean, you have the Orion kind of like empire. You have the Draco Empire, you have the Galactic Federation of Worlds, the Andromeda Council, and each one of these organizations has, different types of extraterrestrials in there, but the organization has kind of shared values, and I think that the values of this Galactic Federation, of the Andromeda Council, they are more in alignment with, what we would like to happen to ourselves in the future. That is, we are allowed to develop as a civilization, to have more advanced technologies, to be able to freely travel to the stars, and to be able to move into a Star Trek future. And that's opposed to the kind of other side, those organizations that want to kind of use us as a mercenary force so that we could fight intergalactic wars, but still remain ignorant as to who we truly are.
And if there's anything I ever ask that you're just uncomfortable answering and you don't want to answer, that's just say so, just be forthright. But I actually really want to understand how is a former political science professor, how do you get into realizing that NHI involvement has such a formative role, assuming at least in the 20th century? My view is that they created us, so that our history begins with genetic engineering. But I want to know for you, just experientially, I assume you weren't like in third grade saying like, clearly the Anunnaki came down, they genetically modified us, and there's a cosmic battle over the sovereignty of the human species. What first got you on this? Are you an experiencer? Does that make sense?
Right. I would say that I was just triggered by Steven Greer's Disclosure Project press conference. I mean, I just knew that these people were telling the truth. And so that kind of triggered my curiosity and my kind of passion to understand what's really going on. And that history, I mean, that's a big part of unraveling the big picture here is how far back does this go? And you know, you get to the whole Erich von Däniken, Chariots of the Gods, the ancient astronaut theories, and everything that I did to kind of like research that pointed to that being exactly true. That's exactly what happened. That humanity on Earth was genetically engineered by a multiplicity of extraterrestrial groups. It wasn't just one group. It was, as best as I can tell, according to the research I've done, there have been kind of 22 genetic experiments conducted on the Earth over the course of millions of years. And these have been led by different extraterrestrial groups, and each group is very proprietary about their particular genetic experiment, and they were very interested to see whether or not that particular genetic experiment would survive. So some groups, for example, were say, if you go back to, say, the Sumerian gods, you had on the one hand Enlil, who was like the commander of the Anunnaki space fleet, and he had established a colony in Nineveh, and also Nippur in Nippur, and then you had Enki also establishing his own colonies, and there would be competition between them because each of these human colonies that was being sponsored or protected by a different extraterrestrial group or deity, as they were regarded at the time. I mean, they would espouse different values, whereas Enlil would espouse the values of kind of like discipline and authoritarian rule and loyalty to the emperor or to the god. Enki was much more of a free thinker. He valued the seeking of wisdom, the pursuit of the arts and literature, and so you would have these battles to see which group would win out, and you look at that throughout human history. You look at, say, the Greek city states. I mean, like Athens, that valued philosophy and the arts, and then you had the Persian Empire, which is all about control and authority. So, and you had these battles and wars and so forth. That each of those kind of represented the kind of agendas of different extraterrestrial groups that were vying to control the Earth. And actually, if you read the historian Herodotus, I mean, he actually talks about this, how the gods were given different lots, different territories of the planet to control, and that they would compete and conspire against one another to kind of maximize their influence.
I want to use the archetype of Enki and Enlil here, just so I can have an instrumental metaphor. The Enki metaphor, or the Promethean one, basically is one that is pro agency, pro sovereignty, pro tech, pro knowledge. And then the juxtaposition is one of pro obedience, pro submission, and clear rules that you follow and you worship, and then you're taken care of. But if we go a bit broader and a bit less religious, one is pro-disclosure and one is anti-disclosure. One is pro-agency. Why should we think right now that the battle for disclosure isn't fought exactly the same way? In other words, is World War III being antagonized, incited, instigated right now as a force to prevent our own agency and prevent disclosure? Because from my perspective, there's not just humans, but also NHI that don't want humans to reach a state of singularity that could absolutely be facilitated through disclosure. The very singularity level tech is the UFO tech that's being fought over. Is what we're seeing right now in the world just a proxy war of different NHIs battling over the worthiness and the sovereignty of the current genetic version of the human species?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing right now in the world is an attempt to drive us into a third world war. And I think that this is largely being influenced by that group, that faction of extraterrestrials that do line with kind of authority and hierarchy and so forth, because that's how they're manipulating people to move down this path of creating a third world war. And the whole Gog and Magog scenario, which is described in the Book of Revelations, and you look at that Gog and Magog prediction or framework in the Book of Revelations, and you look at how the deep state has framed Russia and set up the Ukraine war, and also has deliberately set about to undermine and take down authoritarian leaders in the Middle East. What you can see is that there is a direct attempt here to create chaos and confusion, so you could manufacture this Gog and Magog war, and that's exactly what we're witnessing. On the other hand, you have these groups aligned with that kind of pro-wisdom, pro-kind of evolution faction that does believe that humanity is worthy of evolving into the Galactic Federation or into a kind of galactic community. They're educating us. They're exposing what's going on. And the most important thing is that they are stopping all of these kind of like false flag operations that were supposed to kind of take us more and more down this path of a third world war, a Gog and Magog war, that they've been frustrating those or anticipating those false flag attacks, and that way trying to help raise awareness of humanity so that more and more people are understanding that, oh, right, yes, I mean, this whole Russia-Ukraine war was just fabricated by the deep state out of nothing, that really was something that could have been easily resolved years ago. And so, but it's being perpetuated by those that want war, that want this to spiral out of control. And the same with what we're seeing in the Middle East. I mean, that there's one group, I mean, the Israelis, the deep state is working at the moment, I think, through the leadership of the Israeli government, which is very extreme, probably the most extreme Israeli government that's ever been in power, that is doing everything it can to create or widen the war. But there are forces at play that are saying, no, everyone calm down, don't let this escalate. We don't want this escalating to a nuclear war or third world war. So I think this battle is happening right now, and that the pro-disclosure faction is starting to put out more and more information of the NHI, and I think that's a positive thing. But I don't think we're going to have full disclosure until the deep state and this Fourth Reich influence has been removed altogether.
I appreciate you being honest about the ambiguity, the nuances, the complexities, the fact that both you cannot just assume that there isn't any deception going on, and you also can't have a Manichaean black and white view, that it's a complex landscape. There are two different directions I want to go into here. One, I'd like for you to try to sell me on the existence of a benevolent galactic federation, because it seems to me it would be very easy to sell humanity on such a thing simply by being more overt and more transparent. Or even if I was trying to be deceived, I would want some kind of documents. Give me some sort of, like, can't they get an X account? Can't they get a Facebook account? Can't they buy a TV channel? Why believe that there is something benevolent without transparency?
Well, I would answer that, we are a mirror of the galactics. We were seeded by the Galactics. Our genetics have been extracted from the Galactics. And so you look at humanity today, there are I think there have been studies on this, and the one that I think is probably most revealing is that 1% of the entire human population are genetically hardwired to be psychopaths. They're very intelligent, very charismatic, but kind of like lacking empathy, any empathy at all. Then 4% of the population are genetically hardwired to be sociopaths. These are people who, through kind of sociological factors, upbringing and so forth, don't display much empathy at all. And these are people that typically join criminal gangs and they exploit people around them. And the other 95% of the population are genuinely people who can empathize with others. And so I think the Galactics are a mirror of us. There are those that have a very profound sense of empathy and connection with others. And there are those on the other extreme that have absolutely no empathy and no connection with others or with us. So I think that's where that's where you do have the more benevolent races, the more benevolent groups. And I would, like an example, I would say would be the Ra group, that began communicating through Carla Ruckert, that was the period from 1981 to 1984. That material has been known as the Law of One. And when you look through that, you can see these different ethical orientations. Those that are service to self, that would be the psychopaths, the sociopaths, and then the service to others, those that are genuinely empathic. And that Law of One material describes extraterrestrials on both sides of that divide. So I think there are genuinely benevolent extraterrestrials out there, and people who are more likely to come into contact with benevolent extraterrestrials are those individuals who themselves are empathic, able to connect with others, and they're going to make that connection. You're not going to get a sociopath or a psychopath connecting with, say, the Galactic Federation of Worlds or the Confederation of Planets, for example, because, there's no resonance there. One is all about kind of control, power, conquest, and the other group is all about enlightenment, sharing, and so forth. So I think that there genuinely are positive extraterrestrial groups out there, and the more likely you are kind of like on that path of wisdom, heart-centeredness, and love, then you're more likely to encounter them in your journey.
So I fully agree that I agree that there are benevolent extraterrestrials, even interacting with us here on Earth. I probably have a cartoonish, caricaturized view of the Galactic Federation. Somebody, wearing a peace sign uniform and a bunch of papers, and a whole system of bureaucracy guaranteeing some sort of prime directive and protection. So maybe I need to just dispense with that view. Do you have any salient evidence of such an organization or such a bureaucracy really being in existence, as opposed to just informal groups? Is there really some sort of benevolent organization that's formal, that has represented itself, that is either working with our government? Do you get what I'm asking? And maybe there is, because there's a lot I don't know. I just have never seen any evidence of it.
Right. Okay. Well, there are different, as I was saying, that there are different groups of galactics on that spectrum of, those that are fully empathic and spiritual, peaceful, and those that, the psychopaths that are. But with the Galactic Federation, they are much more of an interventionist organization. They have their warriors. I mean, these are what we would regard as super soldiers. So there are.
And Michael, I'm sorry. I don't know if it's my connection. Is Michael breaking up for you as well, Fringentive?
No, he sounds fine to me.
Okay, then it must be on my end. Continue, Michael.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
so the Galactic Federation of Worlds, as I understand it, is much more of an military interventionist organization. They are not a spiritual organization. One of my books, Galactic Federations, Councils and Secret Space Program, I talked about the differences between the Galactic Federation of Worlds and the Confederation of Planets. You know, the terminology sometimes shifts, but you know, the example of the Galactic Federation of Worlds is the thing that people like Elena Denan, Jean-Charles Moyen, talk about, which is much more of a militaristic organization of positive extraterrestrials who actually go into battle against the Draco reptilians. And so they have been equipped and trained to be able to fight against the Dracos. And then you have the Confederation of Planets, which is much more of a spiritual organization, more ethical. Yeah, and they deliberately have decided not to fight against hostile or negative extraterrestrials, but rather to raise consciousness, because their view is that if these negative groups are attracted to you, then there's something wrong about you, that you are generating a frequency or a vibration that draws them to you, and that therefore that's where you have the polarity happening, and that the best way of dealing with that is to raise your consciousness and so forth. So that's the more positive group. So the Galactic Federation is much more of a hands-on group. But they still do have a prime directive that operates. They will not openly intervene to change a world such as ours, where we are kind of controlled by an elite, a group of humans that make up a predatory class. So, you know, we're talking about the Illuminati, the Cabal, the Deep State, or the Fourth Reich, whatever you call it. The Galactic Federation will not take upon itself the responsibility of freeing the mass of humanity from these oppressive minority groups, because they take the position that this is an internal matter, that their prime directive just authorizes them to fight or to remove the influence of negative extraterrestrial groups. But once they've removed the influence of negative extraterrestrial groups, it's really up to humanity to free itself.
If we are technically, in terms of origin, at least the current version of Homo sapiens sapiens, extraterrestrial through engineering and hybridization, what difference does it make whether it's humans or extraterrestrial for their intervention?
Well, I think that they would look at us as a hybrid species, and that we do have extraterrestrial genetics that connect us to many different groups in our galaxy, but they would distinguish between humanity, the surface population of this world, from extraterrestrials that have their own civilizations in other worlds that are visiting here and kind of intervening in a way that the Galactic Federation would say, well, you know, you're messing up this world. You are doing things that perpetuate this unjust system there. You know, like take, for example, the galactic slave trade. I mean, this is something I've run into again and again in my research, going back to the Second World War era, that there was a galactic slave trade, that people were being taken off planet and their genetics were being sold off to different extraterrestrial groups. Now, if you have an organization like the Galactic Federation of Worlds kind of like intervening, they would look at that kind of galactic slave trade and say, well, you know, we're going to stop it. We are going to interdict. We're going to remove all of the resources of those extraterrestrial groups that are engaged in this galactic slave trade using Earth. But, you know, that doesn't stop the kind of indigenous leaders of our planet, the cabal, the Illuminati, from continuing to do terrible things to perpetuate their power. And that's where I think we are at the moment, that right now that the more negative extraterrestrial groups have largely left, their fleets have left, but there still are pockets of some of them around in the inner earth or in underground bases, and that they are working with the cabal, with the Illuminati, to wreak havoc, to bring about a Gog and Magog war. So that's the struggle we're in at the moment, to free ourselves from that.
Would you agree that so far, since humanity's inception, we have not been able to completely gain our own sovereignty and free ourselves from this?
Well, I would say that there have been times when humanity did free itself of this. I mean, if we go to Atlantis, I mean, all of the legends of Atlantis, I think, are based in a super civilization that existed prior to the Great Flood, or that happened at the end of the Younger Dryas. We're talking around, I think it was 11,000 BC, 11,700 BC. That there was this super civilization, Atlantis, that had reached a very high level and had been on the verge of joining the Galactic Federation. But then it was successfully subverted and turned so that this kind of dark faction that today we would identify as the Cabal, the Illuminati, they were able to get the Atlanteans to kind of like fight against one another, to go on a imperial conquest of the rest of the planet. That's what Plato talked about in his dialogues, the Critias. So I think that there was a time when humanity did reach a similar level, even a higher level of technological sophistication to what we currently have, but that collapsed. So I believe that right now, whereas previous civilizations have imploded because of this conflict between positive and negative extraterrestrial groups, that today we are on the verge of succeeding where previous civilizations, whether we're talking about Atlantis, Lemuria, Hyperborea, and anything before those, that they all failed and collapsed. Now we are on the verge of, I think, succeeding. And I think we already really have succeeded, but I mean, that's just not known yet.
Michael, I appreciate you. So your criticism of the current threat narrative, as it is more or less portrayed, in hearings or in Lou Elizondo's book, is not that it's flat out wrong, but that it's incomplete. Is that a fair summary?
Well, yeah, it's totally incomplete. It's spinning something that's been happening in the United States since the 1940s. I mean, you have Project Blue Book that talked about these UFO sightings, 1947, 1948, and many thousands of sightings, often close to aircraft and so forth. And up until recently, all of these sightings were deemed to not be a national security threat. Right up until 2017, when you had the New York Times publishing their story about the existence of this organization, ATIP and Luis Elizondo. And all of a sudden, this new narrative emerges that, oh, guess what? UFOs are a national security threat. And it's like, well, hang on. So from 1947, when the first studies began of UFOs that found them to not be a national security threat and therefore they could be ignored, from 1947 right up until 2017, so we're talking 70 years. So in 70 years, UFOs were seen near aircraft, near military facilities. They were not deemed to be a national security threat, so therefore they could be ignored, and anyone researching them could be ridiculed. But now, in 2017, the New York Times and Politico published these articles saying that, oh, well, guess what, guys? Now they are a national security threat. they are something that we need to take seriously. And so it's like, well, in 70 years you ignored this phenomenon, and now you want us to take it seriously because now it's a national security threat. And so this is where I part company with a lot of people that are now putting out this narrative, coming from those like Louis Elizondo, David Grush, that this is something that we need to consider as a national security threat. That no, it wasn't a national security threat simply because we knew what these craft were all along, that many of them were NHI, in the beginning, but more recently, the majority have become, secret space program vehicles belonging to the United States or Russia or China, and that these are increasingly being seen all around the world.
So when we talk about Atlantis, for instance, right? There's one theory that, you had some sort of societal moral decay, some sort of corruption from within, and you're attributing that to an NHI involvement. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, I think that the NHI was involved in the corruption of Atlantis. I mean, I base that mainly on the work or the material coming from the Edgar Cayce prophecies, and also the Law of One material, that they also discuss that.
And are you open first of all, this NHI corruption, how did that happen? Did they have a corruption of their consciousness and then it was enacted by humans? Is that your understanding?
I think the way it often begins is that people in these positions of authority often get subverted by kind of like malevolent actors. I mean, here's where you get into the whole idea of demonic influences or interdimensional influences, dark spirits, or maybe AI, that somehow leaders at the top level get corrupted. And when they get corrupted, then that opens the door to these negative NHI arriving in their spacecraft and making deals and saying, well, we'll help you do this and give you this advanced technology. But the corruption has begun, and so they kind of like they amplify it. And I think that's often the way it happens at all levels. That it's always the indigenous leadership that opens the door or closes the door. If you have genuinely benevolent leaders in response that are responsible, then they'll close the door to these kind of dark forces. And in fact open the door to positive forces. Now, so I think it ultimately does come down to the quality of the leadership and the quality of the peoples as to whether or not they go down a dark path or ascend up a positive path.
We have this entire ocean called the Atlantic Ocean. Our maps are named Atlas. We have a Greek Titan, Atlas, who separates, heaven and earth, essentially, not just holding it on his shoulders, but is the separation between heaven and earth. So Atlantis is sort of tantamount to the mapping of something, knowledge, maybe even advanced technology, or a godly realm that once used to be within the grasp of man. And considering that I believe Atlantis existed and it's probably somewhere at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, or at least a large part of it, there's an argument to be made that the fall of Atlantis, the literal continent of it, was also mediated through cataclysms. And that doesn't mean moral corruption didn't happen at the same time, could have been caused by it or influenced by it. Both can result in the destruction of a civilization. But how is the story of Atlantis any different than what we're experiencing right now? How is the story of possible or likely covert agreements with positive and or negative NHI, an impending cataclysm? I mean, we had a solar flare of an X9 level just today. Why why is your view of, because nobody here in this space trusts the government. We all know we've been lied to. We all know there's an extraterrestrial presence. We all know that UFOs are real. Um, isn't it partially true that there is a threat narrative, and it's just not true that it's simple, that it's, I mean, whatever we're being presented with in Congress and in public hearings, it's obviously not the full truth. And there's obviously a reason why now all of a sudden we want some sort of controlled disclosure when before it was an aspect of reality we wouldn't admit. I'm not discounting any of that, right? But is our story right now any different from Atlantis? Because I don't see, based on the evidence that you give, I don't see why it should be. But I'm hearing a difference in your assessment. I'm hearing Atlantis, then we had human moral corruption that opened the door to demonic corruption, and that led to a fall and a resetting of society. And I see the exact same thing now. Why should I view the situation as different?
I mean, that's a good question, Ulrich. I think the main difference is that, as I understand it, that the Atlanteans did embark on imperial war, and that Plato talked about it. He said that the Atlanteans embarked on a series of conquests, and that brought about their cataclysm, that brought about their ends. Now, what we have right now in our planet is that the United States is the superpower, and there is effort to embroil the United States in these wars, the war in Ukraine, the war in kind of like Israel, Palestine, and also to embroil the United States in a war against China over Taiwan. There are pressures to do that. I mean, the deep state is trying to do exactly that, to maneuver the United States into those wars. But what we're having right now in the United States is a majority of the population in the US, and similarly in the European Union, you have a majority of the population that are saying no. We do not want to escalate this war in Ukraine. We do not want to escalate the war in Israel-Palestine. And similarly with China, the people are saying no. And I think this is the big difference. I think the Atlanteans probably didn't have anything like we have today with the internet. I think the Atlanteans probably had something similar to what we all had like 30 years ago, which was when you had, your mainstream newspapers and your electronic media that put out a particular narrative and that the population would just buy into it. And I think that's what the Atlanteans had. And that's why ultimately they collapsed, because there was no counter narrative. Now what you have is an alternative media. You have like this X Spaces, right? And you have all of the alternative channels on YouTube, and more people are going to these alternative channels, to the alt media to get their news. I mean, I very rarely will go to the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN, all of these legacy media sources to get my news. I'll listen to like Douglas McGregor or like Alex Mercurius or listen to, Elena Danan or
Doomspace, or whoever's speaking, Michael Salla in X Spaces. Yeah, I'm with you, right? There's that free expression that's really important. What do you think we need to do? Because I like you a lot. I'm learning a lot from you, and I want to agree with you. I really do. And in many ways, you and I agree completely. There's a corruption of the moral human core. There's a corruption within our governments, and nobody here wants war. Everybody here feels like World War III is happening, even though they don't want it. But it seems to me like disclosure needs to be, look, humanity has never held its own reins, and there's positive and negative influences, and there's a war for this world that's both human and non-human. And I don't know how I wouldn't see what's going on with the UFOs as a threat narrative, even if it was just human, because it seems like the US government has lost the keys to the UFOs. And if Lockheed Martin was, flying around with a world-splitting UFO technology. Meanwhile, our economies are collapsing and we don't have free energy. Um, if this is tech that the U.S. military and the U.S. government itself cannot appropriate, how is that not a threat?
Well, I think they did appropriate it. I think they appropriated it a long time ago in the 1950s when they started developing their fleets of anti-gravity spacecraft. I mean, it began in the 50s. In the 1960s, the first operational alien reproduction vehicles were built and deployed by the US, and that they have just grown in sophistication ever since. So I think most of the UFOs we are seeing, and very likely these Tic Tac craft, they are actually reverse engineered spacecraft built by organizations like Lockheed Martin. Actually, I think the 2004 Nimitz incident involving the Tic Tac did involve one of these alien reproduction vehicles from the Skunk Works, but that was covered up. I mean, there was an individual talking about some of the evidence for that, but he was very quickly silenced and forced to recant his testimony. So I don't think that this threat narrative really has any justification other than what the legacy media is promoting through people like Luis Elizondo and those saying that, well, this ATIP program is very serious and UFOs are buzzing military facilities. They've been doing this for 8 decades now, and nevertheless, a majority of the craft that we see in our skies now are actually part of the US or Russian or Chinese secret space programs. So I mean, maybe this is where the threat narrative could be applied, that, well, maybe some of these craft that belong to the Russian secret space program are a threat. Even in that case, I think that there's a high level of coordination between the Russians, the Chinese and the Americans. I mean, this is exactly what JP has described. I mean, he, in the midst of the whole Ukraine war and the degradation of relations between China and the United States, I mean, the Russians, the Chinese and the Americans were conducting joint missions into this Atlantic space arc to find out what's going on down there. And they're doing joint missions on the moon in a space arc up there. So I think that, on the one hand, it goes back to the whole kind of Cold War. Was the Cold War a serious war, or was it just serious for the kind of like those out of the loop of the big UFO issue, but those that were kind of read into the UFO issue, they understood that the whole Cold War was really a cover so you could generate massive amounts of money off the books for a black budget to fund secret space programs and deep underground military bases without the general public getting any wiser to it, or elected officials becoming suspicious about the transfer of very large quantities of money being siphoned through the Pentagon, through the CIA to these different programs.
I want to hand it off to Fringe and Tiff, and then give the audience a chance to ask some questions in a second. And Michael, I just want to say I really appreciate your courage and your work your entire life. I think people don't understand the toll it can take on someone when they dedicate their mind and the heart, especially in the field of academia, and then they get pushed out. And there's very few fields that are as alienating as the UFO field. It can cause you to become alienated by loved ones, by your family. And so even though I have, I differ in some of my views, I want you to know I'm not antagonistic or adversarial to your efforts and the work that you've done. Pretty much everybody here in this room wants disclosure. I want catastrophic disclosure, and I want it fucking yesterday. All of us essentially have things that some of us have things that we know, some of us have things that we were less sure about. And I'm open to being wrong. Okay, so I'm open to whatever's going on now is more than just your. I don't think what's going on is your usual psyop, but I'm open to being wrong, and I'm saying that because something must have changed. So why did the usual policy of complete denial of UFOs transfer into an effort, some sort of effort from parts within the government, parts that want a controlled disclosure? Because when I look at these hearings, it does seem like there's parts of the government that are genuinely shocked, and it does seem like it's not the same government as it was pre-1990. In other words, there seems to have been a genuine loss of oversight, a genuine loss of control, and it seems like either daddy isn't home or he's not wearing the pants, or whoever's wearing the pants isn't daddy. I don't think right now that the president or the U.S. military, if it wants to, can just knock on the doors of Lockheed Martin and say, hand the UFOs back or we want to buy them. In fact, the evidence suggests that even though it's in government's interest, even though it doesn't need to write legislation for eminent domain because it's in the Constitution, it seems our government neither, even though it has the legal authority, it seems to lack the martial ability, the military power, and the technological prowess and the leadership to get back its own fucking UFOs. And I don't just feel betrayed by my government. I feel like my government is trying to hide the fact that it's not in power. And, you know, when we have right here the flooding in North Carolina, you know, like nobody's talking about the strikes going on. It seems like the government is trying to hide the fact that it's not even in control. And I would like to encourage you to perhaps open your mind and consider that maybe something else is going on, because there is an account given, I think originally by Greer. It's also on your website regarding the Brooklyn Bridge abduction. And there's a couple different versions of the story. One attributes the abduction of, you know, Linda Napolitano as she gets hovered from the 12th story apartment building into a UFO that plunges into the Hudson River. One account is that was it. It was just that woman who was abducted. Another account is that it was the UN secretary whose car stalled on the Brooklyn Bridge at 3 a.m. at the same time, who's also abducted to give the message to George Bush Sr., former CIA director, then, you know, president of the United States, to not move forward with disclosure. And Greer's version is that this is humans, this is contractors, and they didn't want disclosure. The other version is that it's NHI that didn't want disclosure. But no matter which version, if the abduction of the UN secretary also took place, that message was conveyed, as is recounted by Hans Adam II, the Prince of Liechtenstein. It does not seem that our government is control, whether it's human or NHI, and that would absolutely be a threat narrative. And that's, you know, that story is on your website. So I would love to know how you reconcile that story with our current state of attempted controlled disclosure.
Okay, well, there's a lot to unpack there. I think that story of the Brooklyn Bridge abduction did involve the Secretary General of the UN, Perez de Cuellar, and that it was probably more the non-human intelligence that was involved rather than contractors like Steven Greer contends. I mean, Steven Greer, I think he's done exceptional work in bringing out a lot of whistleblowers to talk about the phenomenon, but he has this blind spot where NHI can't do anything bad, and that's puzzling to all of us that have looked at his work or admire his work. But so I think that version, that this was NHI that intervened and kind of put a stop to this effort to disclose back then, at the end of the Cold War, which would have been a really opportune time to share this information, because humanity seemed to be coming together after decades of division through the Cold War. Now, how does that kind of differ to today, to the situation today? I think you still have the NHI that is here that does not want disclosure to happen. I think the only difference is that, there's been a rise in human consciousness. I think that this internet, this global phenomenon of the internet, where we have been able to share information in ways that previously just wasn't possible, and establish friendships and connections. And so that even though you have the deep state and the elites doing the same kind of divide and conquer tactics that they've been doing for centuries or thousands of years, now what you have is more and more people that are just awakened to it all and saying no. Whereas previously those people, if, during the Second World War, if you said, or to say the First World War, if you said, no, I don't want to go to war against, the Kaiser's Germany or whatever, you would have been shot as a traitor or as a coward. Now, if you say you don't want to go to war, you don't want to be part of any war that the United States is involved in, or is enticed to get involved in the Middle East or against Russia, you're part of a large majority that are saying no, and the same in Europe. And I think that's probably the big difference, that right now, there's more and more people that are aware of the big picture, of the machinations of the deep state, of the Illuminati. People are aware of that. People are saying no. You look at the whole COVID thing, what happened there that was an example of the deep state badly overplaying their hand, because all of a sudden you have, thousands and thousands of medical doctors who are highly trained and educated, all of a sudden talking about this conspiracy to hide the truth about the deaths and the vaccine, reactions and all of that stuff. And so you've radicalized and, red-pilled, the medical community. And so that I think is one of the characteristics of why this kind of age is different to, say, earlier eras where you didn't have the internet and this ability to share information on a mass level. So as far as disclosure is concerned, we are having disclosure. Often people think that, disclosure has to be when the government discloses that, you have to have the president coming out on TV saying that, yes, the ETs have arrived. But disclosure really, I think, is more of this process of humanity just awakening. The number of people that are aware that we're being visited by extraterrestrials, but it's being covered up by governments. That's growing every day. More and more people are just embracing this information because it's freely available on the internet. And, there's just more and more examples of how this contact with extraterrestrials is happening. And I just want to mention at this recent conference in Westminster, Colorado, which is a suburb or just outside of Denver, there was a mass sighting event. There was close to 1,000 people out there, and Elena Danand led the sky watching event, and she was told by her principal Federation contact, Thorhan Aredian, that they would arrange a flyover. And even though it was close to the airport, Denver airport, and there's a bunch of military installations kind of not that far away in Colorado Springs and so forth, nevertheless, he told her that they'll be able to arrange something. And so they did. First, there was a flying triangle that came along. It looked very much like a TR-3B. And as I said, close to 1,000 people saw it. There were lots of photographs, lots of video. And then there were successive waves of craft that were seen, that were kind of moving, that were maneuvering around. Again, 1,000 people see them, and people were taking photographs and videos. So I think this is the way we are probably going to move into contact where more and more people are seeing the craft, and especially when the craft are associated with the extraterrestrials, but not always, because that TR-3B was an Earth Alliance craft, and we assumed that it was probably based in Cheyenne Mountain, in an underground facility there. So I think that there is a genuine process of disclosure that is happening organically, and that ultimately governments never really disclose anything. All they do is they just catch up to things that have already been disclosed.
First of all, I deeply appreciate that it doesn't seem like you're trying to section off reality. So I deeply appreciate you acknowledging that we have both. We have entities that likely want the furthering, expansion, and the bettering of humanity, and that we have an NHI likely that is working against disclosure or does not want disclosure. And even if you don't subscribe to that currently, your take or your bet is that the Brooklyn Bridge abduction, whose message, according to that prince from Liechtenstein, to pass on to George Bush Sr. was, if you move forward with disclosure, we will abduct every single world leader, including the President of the United States. You are attributing that likely to a negative NHI, not contractors. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that was a negative NHI, not contractors. And the only difference between then and now, I mean, it's over 30 years ago, is that, we have been able to be assisted more by the positive NHI. And I don't think that this negative NHI faction has the same power it did 30 years ago.
That's fair, and I'm gonna respect that perspective. But if you can allow me to stay stuck in the past a little bit, I was born in 1988. My dad is a white native German. He was selling Mercedes-Benz cars in Scottsdale, Arizona, at that time, and he watched the Berlin Wall fall in 1989, and then we all moved back to Germany in 1990. And at that time, it seems you agree that UFO that plunged into the Hudson River was likely the most well witnessed, or maybe historically the most significant. Of course, the Zimbabwe case had like at least 200 witnesses. But in terms of political science significance, it may have been the most politically important abduction ever. There's supposed to be, I think, October 30th, Netflix is releasing a documentary. This is also a wildly controversial, abduction case. A lot of Linda Napolitano's accounts have been sort of contradicted. Holes have been poked in them because it involves two other men and a lot of stuff that precedes the Brooklyn Bridge abduction and comes after it. But there were still several cars that got stalled on that bridge at 3 a.m. has police testimony. And I think, considering that that prince is still alive, Hans Adam II, I think it's wildly significant if just, 25 years ago, there was a single UFO that could arrest the scientific progress, the civilizational progress, the political landscape of the entire world. I want us all to stop here for a second. If George Bush Sr., and rumors are he did want to, if George Bush Sr. wanted disclosure, and he wanted to, and it makes sense, because what better way to mark your presidency after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the triumph of the West over communism, than to turn over a new page as you're, a decade away from the turn of the millennium, to mark a new chapter historically for the arc of humanity, than to say, by the way, we are also not alone. And a single flying saucer can essentially say no to the United States and the rest of the world. Part of waking up is waking up to the disclosure of their extraterrestrial presence. Would it not make sense that at this turning point, you have an illegal action that gets taken by the President of the United States, resulting in the complete stovepiping of information, the purging of intelligence, and the losing of the UFO keys, but a need to continue on reverse engineering? You give it to contractors because you literally cannot afford the price of disclosure, because the reprisal is war with a technologically advanced species. We didn't have the power for full free speech. Even George Bush Sr. didn't. And ever since George Bush Sr., you see a more inept, more impotent, a more, like a hand-tied presidency, up until the point now where we don't just have a presidency of amnesia, we have a government of amnesia, a government that doesn't even know about its UFOs that it has. Doesn't it make sense that maybe, just like technology can, result in the arresting of any kind of technological progress for half a century, like whether string theory was an intentional psyop or whether it was an accidental left turn we took, and now we're having to go back to 1859 and Maxwellian equations. It's not a stretch to go back 25 years, a couple presidencies ago, and consider, is it possible that we had a double fuck up? That the first fuck up is we really wanted to disclose and we got intimidated away from disclosure. When the government wants to disclose and has been lying for so long, and now it can't. And then it says, all right, contractors, you do this, you go Area 51, oops, that's classified, don't talk about it. Everything fits in this narrative. If all of a sudden a reverse engineering breakthrough was made somewhere in the 2000s, 2004, maybe 2010, but there's no chain of custody, no receipts, because George Bush Sr. said, you know what? We cannot risk this secret coming out. They threatened every world leader will get abducted. So everything gets stovepiped away, and you have the period that we have now from Area 51, from the time Jason Sands was working, from the time that you have Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, from the time Hal Puthoff is quitting in 1996, and then all of a sudden we don't have receipts for anything, and our presidents are feckless, and they have no ability even to command the authority that they legally have. Why think all of a sudden that we have power when all of the evidence suggests our government doesn't even have the power to tell its contractors to hand back the UFOs? Isn't this a perfectly connected, sensical story? Help me to change my mind.
Okay, all right. Well, yeah, I understand the dilemma there. I think you're right that historically, including that incident there in New York, that there was this influence by NHI to prevent disclosure from moving forward. And over the course of the many decades that people have been studying studying the UFO phenomenon, there have been different points where disclosure could have happened. I mean, you have, for example, James Forrestal, the first Secretary of Defense. He wanted to disclose, and he was assassinated as a result of his efforts. And there probably was an NHI element there that was involved in his, if not the assassination, but at least in the kind of mental instability he suffered, because apparently he got into the car of the Secretary of the Air Force, and after that he was just incoherent. He suffered a nervous breakdown. So you do wonder, what was it that he encountered? Probably it was an NHI. And in the early 1970s, you had this incident where there was an attempt to disclose as well, to show footage of the Holloman flying saucer incident. Apparently they were going to release that footage in a documentary, but it was stopped. Again, very likely, there was an NHI influence. So I think that, that Brooklyn Bridge incident and the role of the NHIs in stopping disclosure, that's part of a pattern that's been going on for a long, long time. What's different today? Well, I think we're different. I mean, as a people, we're not reliant on, one source of information, the kind of legacy media. I think another big shift has been the creation of the Space Force and the resurrection of US Space Command. That these were things that I think, or these are developments that were designed to move the disclosure process forward. I don't know where your audience is on Donald Trump, but the one thing I appreciated about Donald Trump was that he moved forward with implementing or creating the United Space Force that had actually been recommended under the Clinton administration, but it was shut down as a result of the 9/11 attacks in 2001. I don't know if you're aware of that history, but there was a
no. Please fill us in. I don't know about it.
Okay, so there was a commission on a space commission that was convened towards the end of the Clinton administration to study what lay ahead for humanity in terms of space and future threats. And so Donald Rumsfeld, he was in the US Congress at the time, so he was appointed to be chair of that commission. And what that commission recommended in the year 2000, the commission report came out in 2001, which is when you had the Bush administration beginning, or the second Bush Jr., right? And that commission recommended the creation of a Space Corps, which would basically establish a separate military service that would be designed to deal with space, and it would be given all the resources to be able to deal with contingencies in space. But what happened was that you have September 11, you had the hijacking of the whole kind of military industrial complex from this potential to start looking to space, which is the future, and dealing with future contingencies in space. Back then they were talking about a space Pearl Harbor that would be very easy for a peer competitor like China or Russia to knock out all the satellite grid at the time, and that would leave the US defenseless against whoever attacked its space assets. So they were talking about these things, but 9/11 led to all of that going underground. It was all aborted. Nothing happened after that. So the whole push to have a space corps set up was kind of like sidelined for essentially 17 years, or actually closer to 19 years, because it was only in 2019 that President Trump came up with the idea or proposed the establishment of Space Force. And so there's a continuity there. And so I think that the reason why they wanted to set up a Space Force is because this is the ideal way in which you could declassify, or at least use something like eminent domain, or maybe you wouldn't even need that, because the corporations would be very happy to build fleets of anti-gravity spacecraft for a United Space Force. Because this would be something that would bring them great profits. So I think this was what Trump was trying to do. And one of the important factors we need to keep in mind is that the more positive extraterrestrials, they would kind of like begin to communicate and interact with us more once we had developed sufficient technologies. And that is exactly what Professor Haim Eshed, the former founder of the Israeli space program, actually said Trump was told by the Galactic Federation. He said that Trump was told by the Galactic, because Trump was saying, well, we should disclose. And the Galactic said, well, you're not ready yet. You don't have sufficiently advanced technologies yet. Only once you have those sufficiently advanced technologies should you disclose. So that's what.
And can you explain why? Why do we need sufficiently advanced technologies in order to disclose?
Because I think there would be the danger that if extraterrestrials showed up with technologies that appear to be godlike to the rest of humanity, that they would be worshipped and that people would give their power away to the extraterrestrials. And this would open the door to the negative NHI to come in and impersonate gods or impersonate deities and say, we're here, we're back, Allah returned or Jesus returned or Kalki returned, whatever, Buddha returned. And so they could take advantage of a gullible humanity and create chaos. And so I think that the reason that the Galactic Federation advised that we need to first develop sufficiently advanced technologies so that when society, our planet, does have open contact with extraterrestrials or inner earthers for that matter, that we don't look at them as kind of gods or anything because they have these incredible technologies, that we have them ourselves. And it's just like, okay, so we treat them more like equals as opposed to like these highly advanced beings who arrived with these kind of like super advanced technologies that we don't have any clue about. So I think that is the reason why they were saying, no, first you should develop the technologies. And I think that gives us a reason, a matter, for understanding the difference between the positive NHI influence and the negative NHI influence. The positive NHI are taking that approach of like, you need advanced technologies, develop them, use them, and then you'll open the door to us making open contact. Whereas the negative NHI, they want to close that door. They want to keep us locked down in fossil fuels, in pharmaceuticals, so that not only do we get sick and we're reliant on all of these kind of like, petroleum supplies and so forth, but that our consciousness is dumbed down as well.
And don't you think, disclosure can mean two different things. It can mean opening yourself up to extraterrestrial, involvement, summoning them, but disclosure can also just mean a revelation of an extraterrestrial presence here. Doesn't our own technological development, at least societally, conceptually, just for the destruction, raising, and rehabilitation of our flawed and pathological scientific paradigms, because it's so entangled with the cover-up, doesn't it require disclosure just so that we can technologically advance? For instance, in evolution, genomics, advanced propulsion, parapsychology, aren't these all inseparable from some sort of a disclosure of the extraterrestrial presence? Don't you need disclosure in order to reach a technological singularity in our current state?
Well, that, again, excellent question. I think that, we need to look at the difference between, official disclosure and public disclosure. Official disclosure just isn't happening at the moment, and it's unlikely to happen because most of the politicians lack the courage to do so, or they're controlled by these deep state actors and so forth. You look at what happened to the UAP Disclosure Act for 2024, how the US Senate passed it unanimously, and then in the House of Representatives it was in the kind of joint the joint hearing to discuss it, it was kind of shut down by just a few representatives from the House of Reps. That official disclosure is something that is going to take a long, long time, and in my view, it's probably going to follow after public disclosure, and that's where I think there's a lot happening when it comes to public disclosure. I have just never seen so many testimonies of credible people coming forward who are having first-hand experiences with extraterrestrials, who are talking about the secret space programs, who are revealing some of these advanced technologies and building them and releasing them. I mean, there's over 6,000 patents that have been suppressed under national security orders, in the United States alone. And, right there, you have, a tremendous potential to kind of like have humanity leapfrog into this kind of like type 1 civilization status, that people like Michio Kaku have been talking about for many years now. But the deep state is preventing that from happening, the release of those patent applications. But nevertheless, people are reinventing the wheel. Scientists are reinventing the wheel, and it's organic. It's just like, whereas before, 20 years ago, a scientist would come up with an idea of a perpetual energy machine or free energy device or a holographic healing device, and would apply for a patent to protect his interests, and that patent would then be suppressed and they can't talk about it anymore, under national security orders. Well, now you have multiple people all over the world coming up with similar ideas. So it's something that is very, very hard to stop. And the kicker is here that the positive extraterrestrials are helping that. I just did an interview and it's just coming out. I mean, it was just released today on my Patreon channel. It'll be available on Monday on my YouTube and Rumble channels with a Dr. David Clements, who's a Harvard, Cambridge trained, theoretical physicist. And he's come up with these new healing technologies based on his communications with, extraterrestrials from the Pleiades, from Arcturus, and what he calls the Elohim. And so I think there's just a kind of surge in collaboration between people who are open-minded and want to work with extraterrestrials, and they're being contacted. They're having experiences. They're having ideas and technologies downloaded into them. So it's an organic process. And I think we're going to see more and more of that until it gets to the point where the benevolent ETs will be able to openly reveal themselves without being shot at by deep state forces. And that's when we're going to have, the official disclosure happening, but that's going to happen after the public disclosure.
I want to, first of all, I think some of this public disclosure is happening right now in this space. Michael Salla, I'm really glad you're here. I'm very glad everybody's here tuning in. I want to highlight something, and I obviously have an agenda, but I think it's really important to highlight your perspective, is that disclosure needs to be afforded, that there needs to be a level of technological sovereignty, especially when a government or a deep state, whether it's malevolent NHI that is at the top of that deep state pyramid, or corrupted humans, or a combination thereof, that disclosure needs to be afforded technologically, scientifically, conceptually, in terms of your consciousness. And that consciousness itself, that technological development, is also only afforded through some level of public disclosure. That we have a bit of an Ouroboros feedback loop here, that in order to, make advancements in the world of atoms, not just in the world of bits and computer science, like has been the case for the last half century, that it's going to require free speech and it's going to require conversations like these. And I'm arguing that we're in a race, that the reason we're not just at a technological event horizon, but an entropic collapse of civilization event horizon as well at the same time, is because there is a war. There is a battle to prevent us from reaching an escape velocity that, here's where I'll disagree with you, has not in its whole form ever been achieved. Because if Atlantis was so sophisticated, it would have been able to, surmount its cataclysm that put it at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. We cannot really say that Atlantis achieved a sustainable type 1 civilization because we had a civilizational reset. It's 13,000 years later that we're basically somewhat approximating what Atlantis was. And, we had an X9 flare today. I believe we're 3 to 4 years away from a solar micronova, a kill shot from the sun that takes away our power grid. If we're 3 to 4 years, 3 to 5 years, or even just 1 year away from losing our electrical grid, even you would agree that it is a rollback of civilizational progress that'll take thousands of years to recover. And if another cataclysm is on its way 10 to 15 years from now, then everything just gets rolled back. And what's really the difference from 6,000 years ago, or 12, 13,000 years ago, or 500,000 years ago, when you keep on starting at square one? So I do think that we may have the best chance we've ever had. But if there is a war, if there is one side disagreeing with our right to sovereignty, our right to growth, our right to afford joining some sort of galactic civilization and a federation, then the closer we get and the more successful we get, the greater the counterforce. And that is what history has evinced, that the closer you get, the greater the counterforces. And that's where we are right now. There isn't a shortage of papers that will tell you we're 3 to 4 years from an AI singularity. And there's no AGI that you achieve that doesn't automatically bring you ZPEs, some zero-point energy, some advanced propulsion that doesn't automatically make you a type 1 civilization. There's no achieving of ZPE that doesn't automatically get you AI. There's no achieving of either that doesn't unlock the human gene code and essentially make you immortal, or at least, 10x your IQ and you can live 1,000 years. All of these things are one singularity that domino tips in the other one. And we're also at the precipice of nuclear holocaust. And I think it is the least arrogant position to take and say that is not a coincidence, that there are forces on our side, that there are forces against us. And if our government is too impotent to help us break through this event horizon, then we should be mindful of the fact that if we don't make it happen and the government already can't, we are going to be reset. I think it's important to realize that there's a counterforce, that it's not a coincidence that we're on both precipices. And I enjoy your optimism because it's necessary, but the optimism is fruitless if we don't realize that we've failed every single time before, and we shouldn't assume that we've just got this in the bag. Does that make sense? I want people to be awake to the war, not because I want people to fight a war, not because I want war, but there is a war against our sovereignty. There is some sort of war against our right to be emancipated and to join this. I'll leave it at that. You're welcome to respond to that. I want to finally hand over the mic to Fringe and Tiff. And I also want to say a deep thank you for joining us in this space, Michael.
Sure. I am much more optimistic, despite all of the events that are happening around us that seem to be pulling us in the direction of war or of disintegration. I know that the micronova event is a possibility, but my view is that the sun is a intelligent being, an intelligent entity, and it looks at or examines the consciousness, the collective consciousness of humanity, and also of Earth's consciousness, and its aspirations as a planetary entity. I think there's a holistic kind of relationship here between us as a species on the surface of the planet, the planetary consciousness itself, and the solar consciousness, and that there's a feedback loop there. And if we get too far out of homeostasis, I mean, that's what James Lovelock described as that point of equilibrium where the Earth, if it strays too far from that, then there will be a reset. Then I think that if we do get too far away from homeostasis, then there will be a reset. But, what I'm seeing is cause for optimism around us, that there's an awakening. People are being red-pilled because at the end of the day, my optimism comes not from any institution, but it's coming from what I see as this kind of rise in consciousness. because of the kind of rise of alternative media, the quest for truth. I mean, people that seek truth can now go to multiple channels.
But Michael, you do understand that I agree with you entirely. I'm just saying, if you really believe in our potential, don't you necessarily have to believe in that threat that other beings don't want for that potential to be achieved? Aren't both inseparable?
Well, I think that there are definitely other beings that don't want us to achieve our potential, and that they have been a threat. Going back, and as you pointed to the Brooklyn Bridge incident, that was an example of one of those negative NHIs, kind of like intervening to stop something from happening. But I think that there's always the countervailing force, and that countervailing force has arrived. The positive extraterrestrials have arrived, and they have kind of like neutralized the negative NHI, and now they're leaving it up to us as a species to determine our future. So it's really now, I don't think the negative NHI have the ability to kind of like deter us from embracing this positive future anymore. That whatever power they had in 1991 no longer exists in 2024. And this is where I'm very optimistic that the playing field has been leveled, and we as a species now have an opportunity to move forward because our collective consciousness has risen sufficiently, or to kind of like implode. And if we choose to implode, then you can have the kind of micronova happening because of this kind of feedback loop, I think. But I'm optimistic that, the wars will kind of like, not spiral out of control, and that the revelations will continue, the cleansing or the exposing of the deep state and all its machinations will continue. But I think it's going to take a little bit more time, and probably another Trump administration to really do the house cleaning.
And, this is such a fine distinction. I don't want to beat a dead horse here. I think it's okay if we understand each other's arguments and we respectfully disagree. We have the same goal, right? We want nothing but the best for humanity. I think the closer you get to disclosure, the greater the countervailing force is going to be. I don't think that a negative NHI has been largely vanquished. I think the very fact that we've made so much progress in just 6,000 years, but we've been around anywhere between 200,000 and 500,000 years, suggests heavily that we've had help and, intervention against our well-being. And that's my perspective. And I understand yours. And I'd like you, please stay. I'm sure many people have questions for you. I want you to hear more, but I would like to ask you, is there anything that would make you reconsider whether or not, I'm not asking you to reconsider whether there's positive forces, but I have a bunch of predictions I make just to hold myself accountable to see whether I'm on the wrong track. Is there anything that you could see that would make you think, oh, maybe we are running out of time? Maybe we don't already have this in the bag. Maybe this isn't a largely an inevitable unfolding. Because if you asked me that question, I would have a number of them. I would, for instance, say that, that we're going to see the unfolding of a civil war just to prevent or distract from disclosure, that we're going to see a bunch of electrical outages, that we're going to see, mass economic disruption, and I could even attach those to timelines. So I think we've been largely betrayed by our government, largely betrayed by a malevolent NHI. I don't think that Trump is going to be allowed to take office. Do you have anything as a definable metric where you would say, maybe Ulrich is right, maybe we need to ramp this up, maybe we need to start forming a breakaway civilization, start making these UFOs ourselves? Do you get what I'm asking? What would it take for you to change your mind?
Well, I think if this presidential election results in Trump for whatever reason, not becoming president, then I would kind of like lean more towards your perspective that the deep state is too powerful, that it is able to hold on to power. But I don't think that's going to happen. But as you said, we need to keep an open mind. But that would definitely change my mind. We'll see.
I love your answer. Thank you for giving me a clear answer. You have no idea how many people have asked this question and they've dodged it. I need to be held accountable too if things don't turn out that way. Would you be willing to come back in the Doom Room regardless of what the outcome is? Because I'd love to get your perspective that future is just around the corner.
Sure. Yeah. I think after the election, I'll be very happy to come back. I've enjoyed this. I think your questions have been excellent. I think this has been a true meeting of the minds, and I do look forward to being able to talk to you in that kind of post-election environment with whatever contingencies we'll be dealing with at that time.
And can you hang out with us just a little bit longer so people can get to ask their questions? I don't want to overstay my welcome here. You've been extremely generous. Do you mind hanging out with us a little bit longer?
Okay, if we make it like 10, 15 minutes, that'll work.
Sure. Whatever you're most comfortable with, Michael. Fringe and Tiff, thank you so much for indulging me. I've been hanging on to these questions for a really long time. And thank you, Michael. Fringe and Tiff, go ahead and ask anything you want to ask.
So I'm on board with Michael here about, the way he's seeing things is my first experience was a cataclysmic vision. So that's how I got into the doom space and, how Ulrich and Fringe and I came together. And although I still see the doom evident everywhere and it's kind of escalating, I don't need to tell anybody about that because I wasn't trying to convert people to doom. I was just kind of, I expressed last night having like ontological shock from seeing things that I saw in a vision come to fruition. But now since that time, I have also come to where you are. Like, I am not an Elon Musk. I'm not anything that's going to prevent any catastrophic events, but I can be a more spiritual person. I can be something healthier for the world. And that is the balance that's missing. And you're right. I believe the sun is conscious. I believe that I get downloads from the sun when I meditate there. I believe in a lot of things. I practice Ma'at. That's, the ancient Egyptian religion that's really revolving around balance and harmony with the planet and with everything. And so I see if we can become a more spiritual society, not necessarily, I believe in God, but I'm just saying a lot of people are kind of turned off to that. But to be lighter, become a lighter civilization, we might balance out some of the scales, and maybe the sun will respond and the earth will respond. Because like you said, these are super conscious. You didn't say that, but they are super consciouses, and they respond to us, I believe, in a way that might be more quantum than the way we communicate, with words and with, the way we act. But if you are something like a conscious entity as a planet or a sun, you're going to respond by the way we act. It's like an immune system, we could be triggering the planetary immune system. But they also, if I meditate in the sun, I get information like a human history or spiritual information, whatever. It just resonates in that telepathic situation is interesting as well. So all these weird, not weird, just unusual to what I'm used to methods of communication. It speaks to me. The more spiritual I am, I seem to have an improved life. And I feel like that would be for anybody. Anybody can do that. And we are really lacking in that. God has been removed and spirituality's been removed, and we've been kind of like consumers. We've turned into parasites, and we can relieve ourselves of that though. And I believe we would see a reaction from everything.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that kind of connection, experiences or communications you've been having with the sun, I think that's very important to kind of emphasize that, we are in a feedback loop here, that we as a species and the planetary body we inhabit and the solar entity, that there is a communication that's happening. So we just can't take anything for granted. If we make the right choices as a collective, then that will influence whether or not the sun is going to emit like a micronova. I mean, people have been talking about micronovas for quite some time now, and I'm sure Ulrich is probably familiar with the Suspicious Observers website, their material on the micronova. And I think that's a very real possibility. But what can tremendously mitigate such a micronova is whether or not our consciousness has reached a point where that relationship with the sun is going to be like, okay, we're going to kind of tamp this down. So it's not going to be nearly as destructive.
Fringe,
I absolutely agree.
Fringe, you've got to have something on your mind.
Yeah, actually, this was a phenomenal space. I really enjoyed your questions, Doomer. I enjoyed the dialogue, all the information that was exchanged. It was phenomenal. I'm very much tracking with Dr. Salla. I'm actually surprised about how much information we're tracking with the Nazi connection, the breakaway, the very unpopular idea that most of this tech we're seeing is, including the Nimitz incident, by the way, which is not popular in ufology at all. But having been on that type of craft myself, I agree that most of what we're seeing is actually ours. And by ours, I just mean human. And, human or a combination of human cooperation with the NHI. Where we differ would obviously be, I would absolutely push back on this idea that the negative NHI have been largely vanquished. But I do hope, Dr. Salla, I hope that there is something to this Galactic Federation thing. I hope you are correct that there is actually a truly benevolent force on our side out there somewhere. So I really hope you're correct on that. I think we had a collective question regarding your thoughts on this James Webb telescope, the information that's coming out of there, that there might be some object coming toward us in combination with this rumor that's been going around the intel community for a couple of years now, at least, that the NHI are actually coming back to watch the end of the world. And this is going to coincide with a lot of the predictions, that are coming out, 2026 to 2033 type predictions. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that before we go to audience questions.
I don't have a tremendous amount of information on that James Webb Space Telescope tracking an incoming craft. I mean, I've heard rumors of it, but I haven't really been able to get enough information to form an opinion. I do think that the James Webb Space Telescope is probably going to play a critical role in the official disclosure process, starting off with some announcement that they've discovered microbes on some distant exoplanet, and that'll be followed up, sometime later by the discovery of some biosignatures technosignatures, that's more correct. Yeah, technosignatures on a distant exoplanet that would show that there's intelligent life in another solar system on an exoplanet. To me, that would make the most logical sense if you were wanting to disclose in a way that would raise consciousness without panicking people. But as Duma has been saying, that there is this negative NHI influence here, and they would obviously be wanting to do the opposite. They would want to panic people by just kind of like disclosing information in a way that people can't handle it. That okay, the extraterrestrials have arrived and they're here, and they might be friendly, they might not be friendly. That's kind of a lot for people to digest all at once.
Thank you, Dr. Salla. Appreciate it. Ulrich, where do you want to go? We have a couple of people who are going to ask questions.
Here's what we're going to do. We're going to be respectful of Mr. Sala's time. We're going to do a rapid fire. So I'm going to let everybody up. They're going to put their hands up, and they're going to have to go through as quickly as they can. And then, Michael, you just say when it's too much, but we're going to try to get through all of them. So everybody on the stage, please raise your hand. I'm not going to go in order of request because it doesn't make that much of a difference because we don't have that much time. I'm going to ask that you ask one question. You go super quick. And Michael, don't feel like you need to give the most in-depth or thorough answer. I just want to be able to get through these hands. I know I'm putting quantity over quality, but I think that's the best compromise at this point. And did I bring everybody up? Oh, no, all right. That's it. No more requests. All right. Nobody else can get on the island. Yeah, I'm sorry, but there'll be another time. The world is not going to end this quickly. So we're going to have Mr. Salla back. Please put your hands up. And the first person we're going to go to is Hollow Cypher. Go ahead, my man.
Thanks very much, Rick, for making this happen. And Michael Salla, I just wanted to say I anticipate your new work. So hopefully before you leave today, if you could drop us a little dime on what you're working on and your previous title, if I'm not correct, please correct me. It was Rise of the Red Dragon, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I recommend everybody check it out. It's one of those audiobooks that I listened to several times to try to absorb all the details in there. So I do appreciate that. As a question, just to kind of summarize where we're kind of at and just to see if you would agree with this, but considering Philip Corso, when he was discussing how that technology was going to be disseminated, I guess a quick aside is if you've come across any of those documents that he spoke about, and more towards the point is, do you think it's really come down to where they gave this leading edge technology to these organizations and now they've developed it out and they're not entirely wanting to give it all back? Do you think it's that simple, or could you add a little bit to that? I'm just trying to keep the questions really, really basic to see where you want to go with that. And I'll just leave it at that. Thanks very much for your work.
Sure. Yeah, that's a very important question, actually. What's happened is that the recovered NHI technologies, they were given to corporations to study. The top aerospace corporations naturally would have had the kind of people and the resources to be able to study these technologies, and agreements were made by the military whereby any technology that was handed over to the corporations and studied by the corporations, that whatever was discovered as a result would become the proprietary domain of that corporation. And so that is where you have the whole kind of process whereby a lot of these advanced technologies have been developed by legacy corporations like Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works, Boeing's, Phantom Works, and Northrop Grumman. They've developed a lot of these very advanced technologies, and they have no interest in sharing it with government or with other corporations that were not part of the history of the acquisition and the R&D of these acquired NHI technologies. So, where does that leave newer companies like Elon Musk's SpaceX or Jeff Bezos's Blue Origins? And so where does that leave these newer arrivals? Well, they have to reinvent the wheel. But they have a tremendous resources, which is the kind of like creative abilities of these engineers who can work to reverse engineer or to kind of come up with new ideas. But they're hamstrung because while these legacy corporations had access to the recovered UFO debris, this is not something that can be easily given over to these newer corporations. So there is that kind of like struggle between different corporations over these technologies and being able to reverse engineer them. And I don't see an easy solution to that, because the legacy corporations will not give up their proprietary rights. So in a way, we do have to reinvent the wheel.
And you don't think eminent domain is going to pry that out of their hands, I'm guessing? Or do you think that's the only way to get it?
Well, I think you would have to have something like eminent domain, but they already tried that. They tried eminent domain in this UAP Disclosure Act, And it was said that that was a bridge too far. That's why that Disclosure Act was shut down, because they had eminent domain, and the aerospace companies, they just approached the chairs of the intelligence community, the intelligence committee and the defense committee, the Armed Services Committee in the House of Representatives, and said, don't let this pass. And so they shut it down. So
Right. So if we can't go through the front door, is there a side door we can go through, Dr. Salla?
I think that two ways of doing it. I think you have to have, say these positive NHI coming in and assisting companies like SpaceX and Blue Origins, those that came much later after the legacy corporations, got their hands on all this advanced tech, and that they are helped by the positive extraterrestrials to develop the advanced spacecraft. And that's going to force the hand of the legacy media, of the legacy corporations to maybe kind of like do some sharing and so forth. But, it's very challenging. I would like to have more information about that process. I've been given a little bit of information, but, apparently the positive NHI are helping Musk and others like Bezos in reinventing the wheel.
Well, that's some disclosure. It's your conjecture that positive NHI are working together with Elon. I hope everybody clips that so that everybody listens to this space. Holocipher, thank you so much. We're going to have Michael Salla back in once civil war, economic collapse, and a complete civilizational disarray has taken place, so we can get his geopolitical insight. Do me a favor and drop down the listener just so we can get through these hands. The following hands, it cannot be a back and forth. It needs to be rapid fire, super quick. Andra, go ahead.
Thank you so much. This has been an incredible space. Michael, you mentioned the councils within the federations. I'm wondering if you could, as briefly as you would like, touch upon who these councils are comprised of, how they operate, and how they may be operating here. Thank you.
Okay, well, the one that I'm most familiar with is this Council of Nine, or sometimes simply called the Nine, that was something that was first discussed in the book Only Planet of Choice by Phyllis Schlemmer. And so she was a channel, but her information seemed to be pretty accurate and kind of matched with the research of this scientist at the time, Dr. Puharich. And so she talked about the Nine being involved in a disclosure initiative in the 1970s with this group of 24 extraterrestrial civilizations, that there was a kind of hierarchy there. And these were all deemed to be kind of positive NHI, and that that Council of Nine is kind of like a very highly evolved intelligence that is advising the different extraterrestrial civilizations on what they can and can't do, given the level of consciousness. As I understand it, it is a very complex, kind of like seeing our planet in terms of our level of awareness and consciousness, and what positive or negative NHI can and can't do. And organizations like the Council of Nine are kind of like the umpires. It's like they're setting the rules, saying you can do this, you can't do that. So I think that's the role of these councils.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andra. And thanks for making it quick. John Strader, proved to me that there is a benevolent NHI, and I'm happy to see you up here, but it has to be a quick question, John Strader.
Yes, I could talk to you all day. What a wonderful space. Thank you, Dr. Salla, for coming in here and giving us a chance to listen to you. Quick question. So I come from the McDonnell family, from McDonnell Douglas. And when you were talking about the earlier space program and the Nazis and stuff, the family story is that we lost most of the Apollo, even though we made the Mercury and the Gemini spacecraft and whatever, but that our family wouldn't work with the Nazis. And so they got kind of cut out from the reverse engineering. Like, they weren't completely cut out, but the family story is that we kind of got the scraps. And so I just wanted to hear anything you know about my family's history, McDonnell Douglas being involved with Nazis or reverse engineering. Thank you.
That is a very interesting question. Yes, the McDonnell Douglas corporation, that was very much involved in some of the early studies or feasibility of anti-gravity technologies and building some of the spacecraft. I know that the manned orbiting laboratory, that was given to the McDonnell Douglas company to build those modules. But then what happened was that in my research, what I found was that that contract to McDonnell Douglas was cancelled, and then it was even though McDonnell Douglas was publicly doing the studies of the manned orbiting laboratory, building that kind of that MOL, the program was cancelled by President Johnson, and soon after it was handed over to Lockheed Martin, and so I think that's when there was this kind of like process of, probably for the reasons you gave, that McDonnell Douglas would not play ball with whatever it was.
Yes, James S. McDonnell, the family patriarch, fought against the Nazis in World War II, and he hated von Braun, hated working with the Nazis, and they hated Lockheed. I mean, everyone in the family loved to talk shit about Lockheed, and so that kind of matches, because they said that basically he wouldn't allow the Nazis to work for McDonnell Douglas, wouldn't have them in the building, and the fact that they had to work with von Braun and them on the first two, Mercury and Gemini, really didn't go over well with him. So the story was always that they basically got cut out because of that. So I find it very fascinating to hear your stories on that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That the Nazis were given prominent positions in most aerospace corporations, and those corporations that did not allow that, well, they were just kind of cut out of the contracts.
John, thank you so much. I understand why that question meant a lot to you. Do me a favor and just drop down to listener so I can get through all of the hands up on stage. Next, we're going to go with, where is she? J-Just, it's got to be quick. It's great to see you up here.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I'm curious about the Nazis as well. And regarding deep state, are they part of the deep state? Is that what you think? And like, I've seen that some of their offspring have been part of CIA and other held high offices in the US. And what do you think of that?
I think the Nazis and the deep state are different entities. I think the deep state comprises the very high level orders of the Freemasons and the Jesuits and other Illuminati groups that practice kind of satanic SIR rituals, and that they kind of like they're a very dark group, but beneath them you have kind of like those that answer to them in the United States. That would be like the senior executive service in the bureaucracy. The Nazis or the German Fourth Reich, they had their own way of doing things. They were, during the Second World War, they were competitors, but they still have a lot of overlap. And they have set up their own space programs. So they're operating out there in deep space, outside of our solar system. I think that their influence within our solar system has diminished over the last few years, but they still are present, and they are still active on our planet.
Thank you, J Just. Parsi, go ahead, my man.
Thank you so much. Michael, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm a lifelong experiencer of the phenomenon, and you recently had Jalila Starr and George Casavelas, and they spoke of the Lyran versus reptilian wars, and I've been through that. I've learned about that in my life. Do you think that is still happening between the Lyrans, the avians versus the reptilians?
What I really appreciated from the Jalila Starr interview was her take on these grand experiments that she described those different groups, the reptilians and the feline races being involved in kind of like sponsoring or trying to help humanity or trying to undermine humanity. And she described these three different grand experiments, first on the Lyra, and she said that on Lyra, disclosure happened too slowly, and so that kind of undermined society, and eventually there was a collapse and civil war and intervention and so forth. And then she described the second grand experiment in the Pleiades home system, and she said that this time the reverse happened. Disclosure happened too quickly. There was too much disclosed about AI and different extraterrestrials, and people couldn't handle it, and so there was, again, a societal disintegration and collapse. And so her take is that this grand experiment now, we're in the third grand experiment, and she describes it as all being set up by these higher level beings, felines and avian beings and so forth. And she said this third grand experiment that, we're going to find a middle path, not to disclose too little, not to disclose too much, but in a way that society can handle it. And that seems to be what I'm seeing around us, that there is an effort to move the disclosure process forward, but not so quickly that it would undermine things. So, I would like the disclosure process to move forward a lot more quickly, but I do understand that if you disclosed without humanity having reached that level of technological development, then we could fall into the trap of the ETs show up, NHIs show up, they had advanced tech, and people start worshipping them and giving their power away, and that could easily undermine us. So I do think it's important to kind of accelerate the release of advanced technologies so that we can reach that kind of level 1 status as a civilization, so that we can handle the open contact with extraterrestrials.
Hey, you guys. Sorry, I was struggling technically. Parsi, did you get that?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Salla. I really appreciate everything you and JP and everyone does for disclosure, because you just corroborated my lifelong experiences. So thank you very much. I would love to connect with you one day. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Parsi. Fletcher, go ahead, my man.
Hey, I've been kind of on a little biological bent recently, so but I'll try and keep my doom hat on tight. So
I can't lose
stay
another
with the theme of the
person.
party
Yeah,
here,
I can't
but
lose another doomer. Stay negative.
yeah, I'll try. So one of the things I see with the tech, right? It was just mentioned like 3 times. It seems to me like there is a problem with addictive technology, and it seems like we need some technological maturity as well, not just development. And it seems like there's some purposeful, technology addiction and enslavement matrix going on. So I wonder about that and what is with that. And then also you mentioned a health benefit that somebody had gotten some information from some different races and was doing some good stuff. I'm wondering what was that? What kind of technology was it using, light or sun or anything like that? I'm just trying to stay biologically fit, right?
Okay, yeah, I think that was Dr. David Clements. I talked about him developing some kind of organic technologies based on sacred geometry and various elements that can generate a biosphere or a biomagnetic influence. I mean, David Clement's research, I mean, that the information he got from the Lyrians and the Pleiadians and the Elohim, as he describes it, it's very interesting because it's developing a kind of organic, natural technology that transforms or mitigates the harmful effects of EMFs and the kind of technologies that we're immersed in. And so his big project is to develop these sacred geometries using the principles of Nikola Tesla, Thomas Bearden, John Bedini, to create a kind of safe biomagnetic field that we can inhabit in our homes. So, I mean, he did give me one of his devices. My wife, who's very intuitive, she immediately sensed a shift in the house, in the kind of bioenergetics of the house, that the EMFs weren't as powerful and strong, and she kind of can feel these fields. So yes, it does work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fletcher.
You're welcome.
All right. Star Captain, I know you were born for this moment.
Oh, no. No. Yeah, I'm jumping in before
Go
Star
ahead.
Captain, because I know once speaking of the exopolitics minds, it's over. Okay, just very quickly, we did have an audience question, and I posted up in the nest, and I forgot about it.
I'm so glad you're asking
Dear,
that one, Fringe, by the way. Yeah.
Dr. Salla, this question. JP talked about a time travel center in a podcast. Are there any disclosure efforts regarding time travel? Can civilians also use this technology to save their children from death? And after this answer, I will gladly cede the floor to Star Captain.
Right. That is a very difficult topic to address. I do not see time travel technology being released to the general public for anytime soon. I think it is very dangerous technology. I mean, anyone that has the ability to go back in time, to observe future timelines, I mean, the potential for misuse is kind of like off the charts. Now, JP did describe going to a military facility on a base that he did show me that I did visit with him. So there's a facility on this base. I'm sorry, I have to correct myself. No, I think this was another base. This was another military facility that I didn't see. And he describes going into a facility where there were 4 devices in 4 rooms, and these devices were enabled time travel between the present and those different time epochs. And each one is very instructive in terms of, why they opened that door. 1550, 1940, 2050 and 2090. 1940, I mean, that's pretty obvious. The Nazis establishing agreements with reptilians. 1550s, that was a period where the inner Earth was openly interacting with surface humanity before the Vatican shut all that down after the 1561 and 1565 Nuremberg and Basel UFO sightings and battles. So that there's a kind of long story to that. And I think 2050 and 2090, those were exploring whether or not humanity would be forced to live in space arcs or biodomes traveling through deep space. That was, I think that was also of concern to the military. So I think these temporal technologies, they are being studied in these facilities. I think private individuals are probably unlikely to get their hands or be able to ever be given access to such technologies. But that doesn't mean that you can't do time travel through consciousness itself. I mean, there's places like the Monroe Institute that teach one how to use their mind to be able to project consciousness to different places and locations independent of time.
We're going to go deep on quantum thought projection.
And
That's what you're talking about there.
First of all, thank you for that answer, Michael. Star Captain, I do need you to engage some sort of warp nuke time dilation, and please make it quick.
I'm gonna use time space law to hold it down. We got to talk about time space law in future governments, and that might help. In order to do that, we might want to have a cosmic level government, and cosmic democracy is what's happening here and starting, rather than it happening behind closed doors and leading to some sort of imperial outlook, like what the reptilians perhaps want. Something like the Artemis Accords being a means of cosmic development that is happening through allied means, and NATO being a collective defense. Raiden, please stop. NATO being a collective defense capacity for allied nations, it could form the foundation of a cosmic republic narrative and a people's cosmic narrative that could challenge that kind of imperialistic outlook. And in doing so, we might be able to try to pursue governments taking continuity of government programs like space arcs and moving them into continuity of civilization programs that are fully supported by things like NATO and the Artemis Accords. And by putting it in that level of a high security and high potential collaboration, we might be able to work towards building a cosmic level government that can practice exopolitics like cosmic foreign relations with said governments after we've built space academies and infrastructure like shipyards that we can actually interact with them effectively. And moving in that direction, do you think that would be a good direction for exopolitics? Good sir, Michael.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I believe that this continuity of species program is already in existence. That, what I described about the time travel experiments looking at 2050 and 2090, one of the things that JP described about what he learned in terms of his missions and actually places that he had visited was that in the future, in one of those contingencies, there would be a large fleet which is accompanied by Nordic extraterrestrials and the kind of like Earth Alliance, and it would be a continuity of species project where there would be a very large number of people that would be living on these space arcs, on these space dome environments that JP has visited, and that they would be traveling away or would be traveling for resettling on a new planet, that they would be colonizers because something had happened on Earth. So, yeah, that continuity of species program is already in existence, and obviously it's not something that they're going to kind of advertise because people would get very frightened if they thought that.
I'm a researcher for the Lifeboat Foundation, and we are researching the Arc 1 project, which is a space arc. So I actually do space arc research, but in relation to there being programs that the government has being fully industrialized and being able to be contributed to by a much larger pool of talent from the public in an open manner across all the NATO and Artemis Accord nations. I think would be a good direction that could also be secure, and act as a more public way of disclosing, is they could, pump all the technologies into the Space Arc program that people in, collaboration with Space Force are now building civil space infrastructure and, civil space governance models. That would be a good direction to be encouraged for the rapid acceleration of cosmic development.
I agree.
I'd like to send you a book that I've written, so please keep an eye on your email, good sir. I'll send you some cool stuff.
Okay, thanks, Star Captain.
Michael, thank you so much. This has been an amazing space. You have no idea the reception and the comments we got. People are excited to have you here. We also quintuple 10x'd our love and lighters listening, and it's been nothing but a pure pleasure for me. I should have explained this to you before. Up top, right above the icon, I know you're on desktop. We call that the nest. You know, you can push anything that's a post on X. You can push it up there. The audience listening can sort of have easy access to it. In the bottom right, you might see, we call that the pill. It's a little message blurb. I sent you the link in our group chat with Fringe, Tiff, you and myself, so that you can access everybody's comments. You have a lot of bleeding heart, diehard fans in here that didn't get to ask their questions. They're still in the request queue. I'm going to request that everybody tag Michael Salla in that common thread for the space where you put your comments in the pill, post your question there, and you'll be able to access everybody's comments, Michael, everybody's questions. And I want to have you back. And I know I went way past that 10-minute time limit. I just wanted to get through all the hands. I would love to have you back. There's also the Netflix documentary I referenced regarding the Brooklyn Bridge abduction. That's October 30th. Eric Mitchell knows Linda Napolitano. I'm going to do everything in my power to try to bring her on somehow, and I think it would be amazing to have you, Linda, and some of the makers of this Netflix documentary all together in a space. So if that resonates with you or not, we'd love to have you back under any circumstances.
Well, yes, I would enjoy coming back. I think this has been a very stimulating space. I enjoyed all the questions. And yeah, definitely after the election, we can resume and there'll be a lot more data to discuss and digest.
Or after the attempted election, either way. And forgive me, I can't resist. And I also want to say that anything you want to promote, please let us know. If there's a post you want us to insert in the comments, I should have said that earlier. Push to the next nest. I pushed up the 2 days that you have for the next Exopolitics monthly thing, but I want you to be able to share your work through our audience, and X Spaces is a great way for you to promote your work here on X. So whenever you want to host one of these spaces the same way we did it, feel free to reach out to any one of us, Fringe, Tiff, and probably anybody in the audience would be happy to show you the ropes. You don't actually have to do it from your cell phone. It's easier, but you have my number. You can call me anytime, and you don't need us to host one of these spaces. We'd love to hear your voice more on this platform.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. So, yeah, thank you for that, Ulrich. And, yeah, I do have a webinar this Saturday at 2 p.m. East Coast time. And so people can just go to the website, exopolitics.org, and learn more about that.
Fringe, Tiff, and then Michael, I'm going to give you the last word. And I want to say thank you for the whole audience for patiently letting me have the back and forth with Michael. And please share the space far and wide, so we can have our fucking disclosure. Fringe, take it away.
Great space. Thank you so much, Dr. Salla. I appreciate you coming in here. Great questions, great dialogue. Let's do it again.
Agree. Yeah, it's been a wonderful experience, and I do look forward to doing it again.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
Everyone. Yeah, and Michael, truly, it's been our pleasure. Everyone, please retweet this. Please share this. Recorded spaces can be incredibly valuable, and I learned so much from everyone here today, especially you, Michael. Everyone, please remember: doom deep, doom dark, doom hard. Thank you so much.